Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Lock podcast. Hopefully, you guys had a great week. I unfortunately sucked in fantasy football on my bets in week three, and I am ready to move on to week four. Excited for week four and ready to move on. So, last week I said that I was to have a special guest on the podcast tonight. Unfortunately, something went down. They had another thing that they had to get to. So, the plan is to do that next week. Next Wednesday, we'll be recording the podcast and going live on TikTok. You can find that at Sports Luck Podcast. It'll be Charlotte Haggerty. I went over her two accounts last week. I'm not sure which one we're going to go on. It's probably the Daddy underscore Mahomes one, but she's also part of the Walter Picks. She is Jaguars.Walter Picks. So that'll be coming to you next week as we plan it now next Wednesday at 9 o'clock over on TikTok. So make sure you're following the Sports Lock Podcast TikTok page. We're doing well so far. We launched that last week, and hopefully we can get some locks, good bets for you this coming week. Now, unfortunately, we have to look back on week three. I hate to look at it because it's the worst so far. 6-10 for my win-loss prediction. The spread was 4-12. Over under, right around even 8-8. We had a great over under the prior 2 weeks, so maybe that's something I want to bet a little bit more. And the locks were only 1-3. Disappointed in that as I was pretty confident in it last week. We'll try to bounce back this week. Take a look at the week three daily fantasy results. It was the worst so far after last week, putting up over 150 points. This week, only 70. God awful. And I told you to pick up Joe Flacco for the cheap price last week. Well, he was the worst quarterback in fantasy, only 285 yards and two interceptions. He was coming off 2 big weeks, a total of 600 yards in those two games and 5 touchdowns. So I thought that, last week would be good for him against the poor Bengals defense, but that didn't happen. No, the running back, Austin Eckler, told you to pay up for him, but boy, oh boy, has he been struggling. Only 5 rushing yards. He did get some assistance in the passing game. He got 8 receptions, so that kind of helped him out, but they got blown out by the Jags. So they were passing a little bit more, but only 5 rushing yards is awful. Feel bad for David Montgomery, only 1.1 fantasy points because he got hurt early on in that game. Khalil Herbert comes in and finishes as RB1. He had a lot of carries for a lot of yards and 2 touchdowns, which is what probably Montgomery would have had if he was healthy. So that's what I was expecting when I said for you to start him last week, as well as pick him up in daily fantasy. Unfortunately, the injury early on didn't help. It was the worst performance of the year for Stephon Diggs, 14.4 fantasy points. He still had 7 receptions for 74 yards, but he didn't find the end zone. Take a look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. Same deal, 13.3 fantasy points. It was his worst week and his least amount of receptions in 9 games, and that was with 6. So that's still really good. T. Higgins, he caught 5 balls for 93 yards, 14.3 fantasy points. Noah Brown might have been the best value last week. I think we got him for around 4,500. He put up 10.4 fantasy points, which is still awful. When you take a look at the tight end and the defense, both putting up goose eggs, 0 fantasy points. Surprised by Jawan Johnson, who actually didn't start off too bad for the Saints. Last week wasn't involved at all. And the Giants thought they would have done a little bit better at home versus their rivals, the Dallas Cowboys. So now we jump to the week three starts and sits. And unfortunately, we had Joe Flacco as a start, which was not good at all. He was the worst starting quarterback, 3.4 fantasy points. But a good sit was quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who the week prior had 6 touchdown passes in that game. In this game, only 11.4 fantasy points, 24th best amongst quarterbacks, which he had 186 yards and a touchdown. So we expected that to happen, playing a good Buffalo defense. They do get the win, but not a good day for Tua. Start David Montgomery. Again, we got to go back to, unfortunately, he got hurt, but it was a good bust day for A.J. Dillon, 5.8 fantasy points, 48th ranked last week amongst running backs. Thought so going up against a good Tampa Bay run defense. Only 32 yards on the ground. He did haul in 2 catches, but only for 6 yards. Now for the wide receivers, Tyler Lockett, not a bad start. 9 receptions, which was the third best out of the week 3 wide receivers for 76 yards. It sucks he couldn't find the end zone because he would have been a very good start. Told you to sit Curtis Samuel. He still put up 13.1 fantasy points, but this was his worst week so far for the season. 7 receptions, 48 yards. Start Irv Smith, which was not good at all. 5.2 fantasy points. Thought he would have a bigger week. A guy that I really liked and I actually put in starting lineups was Tyler Conklin, but I don't know why I didn't have him as my start. He did go off. However, what a great pick for sitting. That's Mike Gesicki once again for the Dolphins, only 1.6 fantasy points, struggling so far this year. But we got to put week 3 in the past, right? It is over with, it's done, and we can improve on this. And that's what we're going to try to do here in week 4. Of course, I got my locks for you, and I am liking this so far. The first game, Thursday Night Football, is the Miami Dolphins +4 at the Cincinnati Bengals. And I am loving Miami +4. They are undefeated. They defeated the team that I thought was the best, was the Buffalo Bills, right now #1 in the power rankings. And they're going to Cincinnati, who got their first victory against the New York Jets last week, which isn't really much of a victory. Now, Tua may or may not play. If Tua doesn't play, then I see this line going up closer to 6.5 Cincinnati favorites. But if Tua does play, I think that it could come down closer to, Miami +2.5 or 3. So once we get confirmation on that, I would be locking in as a lock of the week Miami +4 if in fact Tua plays. If he doesn't play, I might change my mind. But right now, I am going the Miami Dolphins +4 at the Cincinnati Bengals. The over under is at 47. I'm going to say that it is slightly under. Cincinnati struggling to put points up on the board. And I think Miami will come out and not do as good as they did last week. So I'm going to play slightly under. Minnesota versus the New Orleans Saints. This is a game played in London Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. And I am locking this one, the Minnesota Vikings -2.5. I love how they came back against a actually pretty exciting Detroit Lions team after the loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Saints losing in Carolina. I think they're having some issues down there. That defense of Minnesota, and I think they're going to try to get the ball more involved with Justin Jefferson this coming week. I like Minnesota -2.5, just a field goal you need over those New Orleans Saints. I'm going to play the over at 43.5. I think that it does hit that. Cleveland -1.5 at Atlanta. Now, this is a matchup that I might flip a lock to if Tua doesn't play, to lock in the Atlanta Falcons +1.5. I loved them last week as underdogs on the road against Seattle. Now they're back home. They have the Cleveland Browns, who aren't the best team, and you're getting 1.5. So I love that. I'm taking that, and I'm pretty confident in it that Atlanta will cover the +1.5 and win at home. The over under at 45. I'm going to play the over. Atlanta able to put up points. Cleveland's defense isn't that great. And the reverse, Cleveland's going to put up points. You'll see in a little bit here that I really like some guys for daily fantasy and start sit. But Cleveland will put up some points. So I think it hits the over of 45. Washington Commanders are at the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys pulled off a really good win and are now undefeated with Dak Prescott being out. Cooper Rush at the helm. They go into New York, hand them their first loss. They bring in the Washington Commanders, who struggled tremendously last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. And they got pretty much whooped in that game. So I'm going to take Dallas -3 at home versus the Commanders. They have a very good defense. I think this is a low scoring game. That's why I'm playing under 42.5. Give me the Cowboys to win and cover that 3 at home. Seattle plus 4.5 at Detroit. Another might be lock if I am going to bet it. I'm not adding it to the locks yet, though, but may be considered if, again, Tua doesn't play. Detroit minus 4.5. I absolutely love it at home. The offense is clicking, doing well. Now, there is some concern with Amon-Ra St. Brown not practicing today, as well as DeAndre Swift. It's most likely DeAndre Swift won't play, but if St. Brown can get back out on the field this weekend, Jamal Williams is a fine running back. He'll get the job done. Actually been performing better than DeAndre Swift this year so far. Seattle Seattle at home losing to the Falcons last week isn't really good. So I think it's a high scoring game. It hits over 46. But I like Detroit in this one to win and minus 4.5. Next game is a very tough one to pick for me. It's a division rivalry between two teams that are really struggling. Although they picked up wins last week, Tennessee versus the Las Vegas Raiders and Indianapolis against the Kansas City Chiefs, big win at home. They host the Tennessee Titans. Right now, the line is Indianapolis minus 3.5. How I would play this is that I think it's going to be a very close game. So I'm going to have Tennessee cover the 3.5, but I'm going to pick the Colts to win at home. The over under at 42.5. I think it hits the under. It's a divisional game. It's two teams that have struggled to find the end zone. So I think it's maybe at best a 17-14 game. So play the under. Chicago plus 3 at the New York Giants. The Giants should have gotten a win versus Dallas, but they struggled. Chicago able to get a win at home. Now they're on the road. I do like the Giants in this one. I think it's a toss-up game, but I'm going to take the Giants just because they're at home. They were playing this game in Chicago. I would have taken Chicago, but I'll have them cover the 3. I think they win by a field goal. Over under of 39 is pretty low, but I'm going to hit under that. Both teams struggled to hit the scoreboard. Jacksonville at Philadelphia. Right now, Philadelphia 6.5-point favorites, and I'm locking that in as my third lock of the week. The Eagles undefeated. They're destroying teams. I really like them this week against Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville got lucky last week. They caught the Chargers sleeping. They blew them out, but now they're going up against a much better defense in a tough Philadelphia environment. I think Jalen Hurts cooks, and I think they can easily cover that touchdown, 6.5. So give me Philadelphia minus 6.5 at home versus the Jaguars, and I'm playing the over at 47.5 because both teams can put up points. So I think it will be a 34-21 type game with the Philadelphia Eagles on top. Next, we have the New York Jets at the Pittsburgh Steelers, probably the most boring game of the week. It will be. I'm not going to watch it. I'll be watching Red Zone. I am done watching my Steelers until they make a coaching change. Right now, the Jets are plus 3.5 at Pittsburgh, and the Jets will be starting Zach Wilson. He is back. Now, I was kind of thinking this and doing this before Zach Wilson was started. I'm not a big Zach Wilson fan. In his first game back, I think he will struggle. I still think that somehow the Jets will cover the plus 3.5, but I'm taking Pittsburgh to win at home. This is a must-win game for them before they have a really, really tough strand of the Buffalo Bills, Miami Dolphins, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they need this victory. So give me Pittsburgh to win, but the Jets to cover the 3.5. And I'm playing the under of 40.5. Steelers struggle to put up points. And I think in Zach Wilson's game back, that'll be a struggle as well. Buffalo minus 3 at Baltimore. This, I believe, is going to be very high scoring. Baltimore averaging 33 points per game so far this season. The Bills 30. So why is the over under only at 51.5? They expect some defense. I'm not going to see it on the Baltimore side of things. Give me the over as my fourth lock of the week. I think that this will be a shootout between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Love me some Stephon Diggs this week. Always do because I got him on my fantasy team. Baltimore, Mark Andrews, light up the board. I am taking the over of 51.5 as a lock. I'm going to take Buffalo to cover the 3. I think they bounce back in a big way, and Baltimore will give them a run for their money, but Buffalo pulls it out in the win in a high-scoring game. The Chargers at the Houston Texans. look, this is a game that the Chargers need to bounce back from. They need to take a look at what they did last week and say, hey, that wasn't good enough, but we let the Jacksonville Jaguars come in and pretty much wreck us. So we need to figure some things out. And I know that Justin Herbert dealing with that rib injury still didn't do terrible, but I think that the Chargers come back in a big way. I like them -5 at Houston, and I'm playing the over of 44 because I think there will be some points put up on the board. Arizona +1.5 at Carolina. I think that Arizona, they lost to the Rams, but they had a chance to come back. Carolina, big win at home versus the Saints last week. I think Arizona does come on the road, though. I like Kyler Murray way more than I like Baker Mayfield. I think they come on the road and defeat the Carolina Panthers. So I'm playing them that right win +1.5. And I'm playing the over of 42.5 because I do think they hit both in the 20s, maybe a 28-24 game, 27-24 game with the Arizona Cardinals on top. We have the New England Patriots at the Green Bay Packers, and right now it's pretty much going to be that no Mac Jones. Mac Jones will not be playing. They're going into Green Bay. I'll make it simple. Green Bay easily beats them by the 9.5. The Patriots, not good of a team. So I'm going to take Green Bay at home, -9.5, under 39.5, though. I do think Green Bay hits somewhere in the 20s, but the Patriots will be lucky to get a touchdown. Denver at the Las Vegas Raiders. Wow. The Raiders, worst team in football right now. They need a huge win. Denver looks beatable, although they did have a nice comeback victory on the last drive for them versus the San Francisco 49ers at home last week. Now they're on the road in Vegas. The Vegas is going to be begging for a win, and they're going to fight hard for it. So I'm going the Raiders at home to cover the 2.5 to win by at least a field goal. But I'm playing under 43.5. Denver's struggling to put up points. The Raiders get somewhere around 15, 20 points a game. So that's why I like the under. But the Raiders need to win, just like Pittsburgh does. So the Raiders at home versus the Broncos. Kansas City -1.5 at Tampa Bay. If the Hurricane Ian does affect this game, it will be played in Minnesota. But I like Kansas City. I'm sorry. I like Kansas City to lose. I like Tampa Bay +1.5 at home. Kansas City did not look good versus the Indianapolis Colts. I think Tom Brady, with getting back Mike Evans, Julio Jones, and possibly Chris Godwin, will be huge for them. So give me them +1.5 as the underdogs at home. The over-under, I am going to play under 44 as the Tampa Bay defense is really good and their offense has struggled to put up points. And Kansas City struggled to put up points last week as well. Monday Night Football, we have the Rams at the San Francisco 49ers. Give me the Rams +2.5 on the road. I know it's a division rivalry. That's why I'm playing under 42. Both teams struggling to put points on the board as well. But the way that the Niners played in Denver was god-awful. The Rams are going to get something to click, and they're going to pull off the victory, and getting them at +2.5 is well worth it there too. So give me the Rams outright +2.5 and under 42. Again, we take a look at the locks. Right now, we're locking in Miami +4 on the road versus Cincinnati, but that could change. We're going to leave it for now. Find updates on that on TikTok. I'll be posting that most likely tomorrow before the games start. I like Minnesota -2.5 versus the New Orleans Saints over in London as a lock. Give me the over of 51.5 between Buffalo and Baltimore. And my other lock of the week, I am going with, I got to remember who I had. I remember now, Philadelphia -6.5 at home versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, last week, daily fantasy, the worst yet. So we got to bounce back in a huge way. Week 1, we didn't do so good. Week 2 was tremendous. Week 3 was god awful. So I think week 4 is going to be good. And I'm starting off with Geno Smith. Some of you might be like, why Geno Smith? Last week you said Joe Flacco. Look how bad he did. He's not a good quarterback. Well, Geno Smith, last week he threw for 325 yards and 2 touchdowns against the poor Falcons defense. Now he's going to be going up against a poor Detroit defense. If he can do close to what he did the last time, he's definitely worth the 5,400 to pay for. So give me Geno Smith at my quarterback spot. That allows me to pay up for two top running backs and a guy that I think is going to explode this week. Now, if he plays, there's some issue with injury, but there's nothing stating that he'll miss time. But Christian McCaffrey, 8,700. I love him this week. He's yet to find the end zone, but very promising numbers last week. 25 carries for 108 yards. He's getting the volume, and this Atlanta Falcons, or not Atlanta Falcons, the Arizona Cardinals defense is not that good. So I think he has either 1 to 2 touchdowns this week. This is his explosion game. So I'm taking Christian McCaffrey at that price. And Nick Chubb right now under 8,000. He is the running back one so far in fantasy, and you get him for under 8 grand. What a steal! He had a huge 3 touchdown game 2 weeks ago, and he's been racking up the yardage. I believe he's number one in yards on the ground so far. He will run over the Atlanta Falcons defense down in Atlanta. So give me Nick Chubb as my other running back. Wide receivers, we're going with 4, including the flex spot. We're going to start with Amari Cooper, another Cleveland Brown. Cooper has been tearing it up. He's had over 26 fantasy points in the last 2 games, double-digit targets, and over 200 receiving yards. You get him for only 6,300. What a steal. I believe he is the 4th best wide receiver in the last 2 weeks. So he's definitely somebody that you want to add for daily fantasy with a bad defensive matchup. We're also going with Devonta Smith, who had a career day versus the Commanders last week. 8 receptions, 169 yards, and a touchdown. You get him for only 5,800. What a steal there going up against that Jacksonville defense. I think he gets the job done. He'll get you double-digit fantasy points. Now for the cheaper end, because we're paying up at running back, Greg Dortch, still a fantastic buy for the 5,000. Another guy that's getting targets. You want to utilize him before DeAndre Hopkins comes back for the week 6 suspension, as well as I believe AJ Green's out this week. So it's going to be between him and Hollywood Brown. So for the 5,000, give me Dortch. He had a lot of targets again, 9 receptions last week. So what a great deal for him. Another great deal at 4,500 is Romeo Doubs for the Green Bay Packers. Doubs got into the groove last week with Rodgers, catching all 8 of his targets and a touchdown. So I think that continues against this poor Patriots team. They got to find somebody, and Doubs has been the guy. Give me him for the 4,500. Lastly, for the tight end, I'm taking David Njoku, a guy who has been tearing it up the last couple of weeks. I believe he ranks as the 2nd best tight end in the last 2 weeks. He had 9 receptions on 10 targets last week for 89 yards and a touchdown. We're racking up on the Browns this week, but it's because of the defensive matchup, and it's going to be Njoku and Amari Cooper getting the receptions. Even if he gets 5 to 6 receptions, he's worth the price of only 3,700. So I like me some David Njoku. And I'm going the Buccaneers defense. I know they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, but the Colts were able to take care of the Chiefs last week. The Buccaneers, one of the top defenses in the NFL. So I like them for only 2,700. I like them over some very poor teams around the same price. I'll take the risk of them playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Last, we take a look at the week 4 start sits. I'm starting me some Jared Goff. He's got his easiest defensive matchup so far this season versus Seattle, and he ranks quarterback 6 in fantasy in the last 2 weeks. I think he has a big week for him. TJ Hawkinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they get a lot of receptions, and they pull off a win at home. I'm sitting at Trevor Lawrence for the same reason why I sat Tua last week. Tua had a huge week in week 2, not so good in week 3. Trevor Lawrence had a huge week in week 3. I don't think he has a huge week in week 4 versus that Philadelphia defense. So I'm definitely going to be sitting him. I'm starting at running back Khalil Herbert. Again, we're going to Chicago running back. There's still optimism that David Montgomery could play. So if it is Montgomery, take him. But Khalil Herbert could still be a flex play, getting a lot of looks. But he was the number one running back last week in fantasy, 2 touchdowns and over 150 yards. Easy matchup versus the Giants. I'm going to be sitting Alvin Kamara. Huge disappointment this year so far. He's due for a big year, but he hasn't shown it so far. Only 100 yards and no touchdowns. So I think that he will struggle against the Vikings defense, and I would be sitting him this week. I have him in a fantasy league, and I am sitting him. I am starting wide receiver Amari Cooper. I told you why already. Number 4 fantasy wide receiver in the last 2 weeks. 16 receptions and over 200 yards. That continues versus the Atlanta defense. I will be sitting wide receiver Rashad Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens. He has been kind of a flex play in some of the last couple of weeks, but now going up against the Bills defense, top defense, I don't like that matchup at all. They were able to shut down some of the Dolphins receivers to not have as good of weeks last week. They will shut down Rashad Bateman. I'm starting David Njoku at tight end. Told you why I like him, number 2 in fantasy the last 2 weeks. And I'm going to sit Irv Smith Jr., a guy I told you to start last week, but just, god awful. Going into London, they're going to want to pick up a victory. So they're going to focus more in on a guy like Justin Jefferson, who has been kind of struggling. So those are the week 4 start sits. I want to thank you for listening in to this week's episode. Make sure you subscribe and like this YouTube channel, as well as follow me over on Instagram at sportslockpodcast, and follow me on TikTok, where I post some good betting videos, some fun videos involving fantasy football start sits. That's at sportslockpodcast as well over on TikTok. Next week, the plan is to be on TikTok Wednesday night. That will be at 9 p.m. Eastern time on October 5th. I'm supposed to be in with Jaguars Walter picks, but we're probably going to be on the Daddy Mahomes account. So make sure you follow her, Charlotte Haggerty. She's great. She's knowledgeable in fantasy football. We're going to be live on TikTok while we are doing the podcast. So if you go ahead over there, you can ask us some questions. We'll answer live on the podcast as well. So good luck to you in week 4 in fantasy football. Hopefully we can cash some tickets and come back happier in week 5. Have a good one.